Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours for October 2024. I'm Karl Sakas, Agency Advisor. Here's a preview of what we will be talking about today. First up, we have a special guest, Diane Stadlin, who is my COO here at Sakas and Company. We'll be talking about Diane's experience working in agencies for decades, using Agency Past to help you predict agency future. Then I'll share a new survey that I'm doing to help you see how your agency compares, particularly around the topic of agency-client relationships, a hot topic. And if you complete the survey, you'll have an opportunity to get early access to the results. Then I'll talk about a growing problem, which is employee burnout. Agency owner burnout has been a problem for a long time, but I'm noticing a spike in employee burnout, and we can talk about what to do to recognize the problem and some specific things you can do to help support and retain your best employees. Finally, we'll take a look at handling difficult client conversations, a topic that's in the survey, but certainly an evergreen topic. And Diane and I will share some examples there, in addition to the conversation I have with my colleague Kate, or our colleague Kate, about employee burnout. If you have questions you'd like us to answer in a future office hours, feel free to include that when you RSVP. You're welcome to sign up for any upcoming event every second Tuesday of the month. All right, well, let's welcome special guest Diane Stadlin. Diane, thanks for joining as a guest today.
Happy to be here, Carl.
So you have worked in agencies for decades, and one of the things that I've noticed from your experiences that you've shared, there are a lot of running threads that apply today in terms of difficult client situations, project management pieces, agency infrastructure, and so on. And so I'm excited that we can do a fireside chat today to talk a bit about that. But maybe first, as an opening, if you could just introduce yourself.
Happy to. At times like this, I tend to feel like, the old story of when I went to school, we walked 10 miles uphill every day, both ways.
Yes.
So I had the experience of being able to witness things that most people today would look at and be, what's a rotary phone? How did you possibly exist in this? Which is, at times both good and bad. So I started actually on the broadcasting side, working in traffic and sales, not the helicopter traffic reports, but when you're scheduling commercials on radio, they call that traffic. So I worked closely with agencies who our salespeople were selling with and in helping the agencies get their commercials placed. Then we made a big move, big transition in our life, and I found the agency world. And I wasn't quite sure, how that was going to work out. But I thought, well, I understand what agencies do from where I came from. Maybe this will work. And it did. And as you said, it's been decades. And I started out working in media because that was like the closest alignment. But over time, moved into research and analysis and client services. And ultimately, as managing director of an agency, then moved to another agency where I was president and operations and so many different roles that even though I spent time in the same entity, I had so many different jobs. It was really a masterclass in all the different aspects. I think the only thing I didn't do was actually do creative. I was not, in that vein.
Got it. Got it. And so ultimately, you're sharing from experience both at a holding company, agency, as well as independent. So, a bit a mix of everything.
Definitely.
We talked a bit about the roles you've had. What has surprised you about the agency business today versus when you started your career in agencies?
Everyone, I think talks about how so many things have changed. And a lot of times listening to our clients and other people in the industry, it's like, well, the pathway to getting things done, yes, radically different. But if you look at the foundation, what are you trying to do today with your clients? Well, they have a product or service they're trying to sell to customers. So it's the agency's job to help facilitate that. And you're still explaining why this product or service is better than the competition, and you're persuading the customers to buy that product or service. The avenues, I mean, it's a whirlwind. Um, I can say that we used to be excited when FedEx first started
Hmm.
because, oh, we could deliver things overnight versus waiting for the mail. And then that became problematic because as technology enabled speed, when you move like from FedEx, oh, you can fax something. Oh, then you could email it. Then it could be uploaded to another server and your clients could access it from there. And then everything is cloud based.
Hmm.
It still requires humans, or did until recently, required humans
Yeah.
to be able to physically do the work. And oftentimes I see and hear now that clients don't quite make that connection. That just because speed has been enabled doesn't mean that the idea can be created to match that speed. Now that brings in AI,
Hmm.
where I remember when this thing called the internet came to be. I
Yeah.
had clients who were like, okay, you want me to put this thing in my advertising so that people can go somewhere else to this other thing I don't understand and learn about my product. Why don't we just tell them here in the ad or well, we've had to explain that. Now with AI, you're looking at, a similar incredible leap where it's okay, what is this? Why do I want it? How's it going to help me? And at the end of the day, I think the agencies have the opportunity to harness the new technology and use it for the benefit of the client, but understanding that for a lot of clients, I mean, they're not doing this every day, maybe in their companies. Some are, some aren't. They're hearing about it. They're seeing it in the news or talked about in trade or seeing things at events, but they may not really grasp, okay, how is this going to benefit me and help me sell more of my stuff to the right customer? So it's our job on the agency side to help them navigate that and do it in a smart way
I mean,
and not and deliver the value proposition that the agency brings to the table,
right.
that utilizing things like AI, not having it replace you. Because it would be very easy to say, oh, well, what do we need this service for anymore? We can just do it ourselves. Some people will do that. But hopefully, agencies can create an environment where the value proposition of what you bring to the table is still seen by clients.
And I mean, I would imagine from your experience, I mean, I know from my experience, not new, cheapskate clients have been around for a long time. Thinking back, are any particularly memorable clients that wanted, everything for nothing, or had particularly unreasonable expectations?
That is, one of the constant battles that really hasn't changed. And what has changed, I think, in the agency field, that it's both good and bad.
Hmm.
Um, my training was, I mean, I can't describe how thankful I am and appreciative of the opportunities that I had in early in my career. Um, I was working with people who, if you recall the TV series, everyone talks about Mad Men. I mean, the people I was working with, they were the original Mad Men. Now,
So sort of
granted, that was
early 80s, I guess they were sort of nearing their retirement from starting in the 60s, kind of thing.
absolutely, and they were in their new life owning their own agency or running an office that they moved on from the huge corporate structure into smaller environment. But in my first agency, we had over 200 employees. So it
Mm,
was not really small. But what has happened today, technology enabled,
mm,
is that agency headcount can be much smaller, which allows people to work at lower budgets. So you have to be able to differentiate yourself. Does everybody have cheapskate clients? Yes. Um, one of the things that we did early on, was fortunate enough to work with Fortune 100 clients,
mhm.
multi-million dollar budgets on a global and US based and Canada based geography. But we also discovered that there were clients at the time that we just couldn't service. It was,
Mm.
this is what it's going to cost you. And they're like, well, can't I just get the simple version? I don't want all that. I just want this stripped down version. So
Right.
we created an agency within an agency that stripped away the layers. What you're seeing now is that stripped away the layers situation, I think,
Hmm.
that clients have much more direct access to the people who are actually doing the work. And I think that's both good and bad. I mean, it trims down overhead, it trims down headcount size so that more people can start an agency or work with clients. And so, gee, capitalism. But part of the issue is that direct access puts more pressure on people who maybe don't want that client facing role.
Right.
And they think, well, if I'm just talking to you, why am I paying these higher rates?
Mm.
So you've got clients with a limited budget who are like, oh, I don't want all of this. I just want the minimum. And it's, I don't think you're ever going to eliminate those folks who are looking for a bargain or who think that they understand the value to put on something. And from the agency side, it's the responsibility of the agency to continue to prove or to highlight the value you're bringing to the table and why things cost what they do. I mean, you can go to the dollar store today and find items that cost, now it's $1.25, but
Yeah.
you can find cheap items and you can go to Target and find the same item and it's not going to be $1.25. So it's the choice of, are they equal? I submit that they're not always equal.
Hmm. And I mean, also, you can potentially order it directly from wholesalers abroad and pay even less, if you're willing to wait for a bit on the shipping. And if you're joining live, we're sharing some articles about value anchoring as a way to help anchor the value you're providing to help support higher prices, as well as packaging the value that you have. For instance, A number of years ago, I was at a convenience store at a gas station while I was on a trip, and I was waiting to use the bathroom. And while I was waiting, I was looking at some of the displays, and one of the things they had was a pink box listed as allergy relief, $1 for 36 pills. Seemed like a good deal. I noticed they also had a blue box listed as sleep aid, also $1, 8 capsules. And as I looked closer, I noticed it was an identical medication, different doses, but it's both generic Benadryl as allergy and sleep aid. And, so that's a case of packaging the exact same thing, but in different ways, different values, different buyer needs. So, speaking about buyers, what's your sense, Diane? Is it easier or harder to manage client expectations today?
We just talked a little bit about pricing, and I think clients have access to all of the information. Like they know that fiber is out there. They know that a lot of things are, offshore. They're getting pressure within their own companies to deliver things faster, cheaper, and putting more pressure on, you know, the agencies to do the same. And it's it's this balancing act, I think, of how you create your niche and are able to, again, what is the quality the client is looking for? How do you prove that? But using alternative resources, how do you figure out a way to keep the client from trying to manage things on their own? Because they think that they can go to a fiber or to, well, let's just get a contractor in on our side, and they're not necessarily thinking about all the ramifications of how you manage the situation, because it's not in their daily work to be maybe overseeing the various processes or what's really involved. And at the
Which
end of the day, I think relationships are the foundation still today of how an agency can differentiate themselves, because a client is not necessarily going to get the same experience from working with an offshore contractor that they are with an agency. They get the benefit of not having to deal with everything.
And that adds an important point around context. For instance, for my first book, I just finished the manuscript of my fourth book, which here's a cover preview: "Calm the Chaos: How to Lead Your Team with Confidence and Compassion," coming out in 2025. But as I think about designing the cover for my first book, which is on speaking for Lead Gen, the independent marketing agency, the initial cover I did was on through Fiverr. It was like $65, not only five, but $65, and I was happy with it. But then as I came out with my next book, which followed my branding better, went back and had our designer plus illustrator create a version that's more on brand. And then, of course, getting further design help after that for the newer books. Um, I think if I had been okay with the original $65 cover, I wouldn't have wanted to spend more money. But I think from a matter of whether it's taste or discernment, I knew that I wanted it to match rather than have the existing one. So, I mean, I think that gets into client sophistication as well. If you can do a better job, but the client doesn't value it, they're not going to pay for it. Um,
The value proposition is key, and you know the advice that you're bringing in, the outside perspective.
yes.
I think agencies sometimes shortchange themselves when they're only doing execution. Now, in some instances, that's what they decided they wanted to do, that we execute and we're the best at whatever this specific niche niche execution is.
Yeah.
But that leaves a huge strategic void of the why are we doing this? And what are the options of how to do this? So when I mentioned before that, there are some things that have not changed, but the delivery mechanisms have. I mean, when I started, you had TV, radio, print, billboards, some events. Um, it was pretty easy to figure out from ratings and things where people were putting their eyeballs or ears, and okay, so you knew there was some waste, but that was all that was there. In today's environment, with the choices and the sophistication of delivery, um, it's mind-boggling that you have so many fragmented opportunities to reach people with your same message. The tracking is imperative, but also, where do you stop? How far down in the food chain do you go to try and find the audience? So the client sees so many options. Well, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that?
Right.
And it all kind of ties back into, well, how much do you want to pay for this that we
Mm.
were talking about before? Because the cheap route is, okay, yeah, just throw some online advertising out there or throw some things out that people might find versus a very strategically planned campaign that has a research component so you know where the audience is most likely to be found. And then, all right, how are we going to measure whether this is effective or not?
Right.
Can what we're buying actually deliver some of the metrics, or is it no, just give us your money and trust us that this is, yeah, that we're going to do this. So the basic premise of what you're trying to accomplish is the same. It's just that the delivery mechanisms have just exploded and they're going to continue to explode.
As we get into the home stretch on our fireside chat, that raises something. What do you think are the riskiest things agencies do?
I think at this point, it used to be, all right, not investing the client's money in the right way or
Okay.
listening and being really off strategically. Today, it really is, I think, more centered around, all right, what is the client looking for? And with the quickly changing technology, it's like, oh yeah, we can do that.
Mm.
And not really being familiar enough or educated enough to be able to manage how to interact with all of the proliferation of opportunities there in in delivery, because there have been times in my career where I've done a lot of never been done's before. It
Okay.
was like, we've never done that before. Could we do it? How could we do it? And if you partnered with the client and continued the education of, okay, we're on new ground here. We've
Right.
got a plan. Here's how we're doing it. Are you on board? Let's go on this journey. We've had some successful ones and some that didn't work quite as well as we hoped. But today, where the cost of entry is lower,
Yeah.
if you think about equate it to like a Super Bowl ad versus doing some Facebook ads locally or whatever. The price, the investment and the risk is much different.
Yeah.
The investment in AI makes things a lot more complicated in the use and in subsegments of the audience looking for the right place to reach them, but not really fully developing the strategy and understanding as an agency
Mhm.
how to deal with new platforms or new aspects of what your client is looking for. You can't gain that credibility back as easy as you could before
Right.
because you're distanced. And what I mean by that is you used to spend a significant amount of face time with clients. I think over the years, that's a big change. That is diminished. You
Right.
get on a quick call, you're not pitching something. Agencies are not necessarily what we used to call agency of record, where you're doing an end-to-end program with a lot of different elements. Back
Yep.
to the niches, you're doing this piece, and this piece. And the opportunity for being deeply ingrained into a client's business, I think, has changed over time, that you don't get that deep dive into the company and the client and their product that we used to
Right.
get.
One more question, and then or one more question for now. I mean, this is great stuff. We've talked a lot about AI and we've talked about clients. Talking about team members at agencies. You've seen in our work helping agencies, a lot of agencies are wondering when to hire and which role to hire and things like that. What, if anything, has changed around hiring humans at agencies?
I think one of the most difficult things as more and more work has become remote, it's the onboarding and the training. Um, I cannot stress deep enough like the incredible opportunity I have. We used to do a lot of driving to visit clients. So you had so much, windshield time. The training that I received one-on-one, sitting in the car and just talking for whether it was a half hour or 7 hours. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't get that. I mean, that's not something that you can get today. You're on a Zoom call in and out. And I
Yeah.
think that it's critical that as you're hiring people, you've got to have a plan for, all right, how are we going to train and evaluate these people? Because it's easy for somebody to come in and give you a resume and show things, and then they're gone, and then they're on a Zoom call. You're not able, you can't be on Zoom with them 24/7 or even 5 or 7 or 8 hours a day, where in person gave you the opportunity to observe or to interact on an immediate basis if there were issues or questions. So the onboarding, the training, the monitoring, the evaluating, the opportunity, the access. I mean, you
Right.
have to be prepared to give people access to their peers, their supervisors, and to learn from the people around them. And I think that the remote environment, I really believe it has hampered some of that. I mean, it allows people to hide. It wasn't too hard to be able to figure out who was really working and who was hiding or who wasn't getting the job done. Now,
Mhm.
um, the the bar I think has been lowered in terms of productivity and contribution. There's a fixed number of work, amount of work still, and people are allowed to do it almost at their, I don't want to say convenience, but the parameters are much broader because it's remote. Time has expanded.
Mhm.
So it's that sense of urgency, the quality control, and the ability to nurture and educate and mentor. It's becoming much harder as a supervisor, I think, to do that for new hires and to maybe see when people are getting into trouble. You talked about burnout before. It's one thing if you're looking at people every day
Mhm.
and you can see and you can look at the work and all right, something's going on here.
Right.
Remotely, people can, as I said, they can hide things.
Yes.
And you're not necessarily doing it in intentionally, but I'm not saying they're doing it negatively, but they
Some
can mask what's really going on.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of remote work. I mean, our business is fully remote, but you still need to get people together for retreats. You still need to think about all hands meetings. And it is harder to manage people. It's harder to be a manager and a leader when your team is remote. I mean, I talked about that in the Made to Lead book. Tip 22 out of 31 was decide if you're the kind of manager who rewards FaceTime or results. If you've got a remote team, you need to be focused on measurable results. You can't measure everything, but you can't just send people off and expect they'll get it done. I'd like to dig a bit deeper on client expectations, but we're going to talk more about that in our last segment today. So let's hold off on that one. Diane, thank you so much for joining as our fireside chat guest today. Great stuff, and for everyone listening, whether live or on the recording, pay attention to what Diane shared. Diane, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at employee burnout, what you can do to identify it, and how you can support your team. And then Diane and I will talk a bit more about client expectations, in particular about dealing with conversations with difficult clients. Before Kate and I take a look at employee burnout, I wanted to share about a research project that I'm currently doing that you might like to participate in because you'll get early access to the data. So, what is that? Well, as an agency leader, you're often wondering how does your performance compare to other agencies? And you can ask friends or maybe frenemy competitors what they're up to and how things are going. But obviously, that's not giving you a fully quantitative view of things. One solution, well, that's to participate in my new The State of Agency Client Collaboration survey. It's running now. If you're watching us live or if you're watching the recording, we'll have it open for a bit. This is in coordination with DataBox. We're specifically looking at, well, how agencies and clients are working together, what's working and what's not working. If you're joining us live, go ahead and click the link to take the survey. It'll take about 15 minutes or so. And you'll also get instant access to the initial preliminary results. Or if you're joining us on demand, click the like and subscribe button, and then click the link in the video description to take the survey. And I'll be sharing the analysis of that in a live event with Pete Caputa from DataBox in early 2025. But again, if you take the survey, you can get early access to the results. If you've noticed some challenges with your clients, you're not alone on that. 42% of agencies say that client communication is their biggest bottleneck. Diane and I will talk a bit more about that soon, but anything you can do to make things run more smoothly is a good thing. So click the link, take the survey, and look forward to hearing what you share. All right, over to our next segment, and let me bring Kate in. Here we go. I have noticed that employee burnout is on the rise among agency teams. Agency owner burnout has been a big thing for a long time. I wrote about that in a guest post for Bureau of Digital in, I think it was 2020, about burnout at agencies focused on owners. But I've noticed a spike in burnout among agency employees. And if you haven't noticed this at your agency, my concern is it might be happening and it's happening right under your nose. But if you don't take action, your employees are going to quit. And even if they don't quit, they're likely unhappy and kind of barely hanging in there. So let's talk about that. And Kate, thank you for joining as we talk about this.
Of course.
So, what is burnout? I mean, the World Health Organization has their definition of that. Ultimately, it's looking at they refer to it as an occupational condition. They're not quite at the point, or an occupational phenomenon. They're not quite at the point of saying it's sort of a medical condition, but it's approaching it. They mentioned under ICD-11, burnout is a syndrome conceptualized resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed and is characterized by three dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and number three, reduced professional efficacy, as in they're not as good at their job as they were in the past. Now, if you're listening and you're an agency owner and you're hearing that and you're like, oh, that sounds familiar. Energy depletion, exhaustion, increased mental distance from the job, reduced professional efficacy. We've shared some articles. We have some articles in chat that we'll share to help support you with that. The thing is, as the agency owner, you have a lot of autonomy. You have control to an extent over your schedule, over the people you choose to work with, and things like that. That'll vary, right? You may work with some difficult clients if you need to get money in to help, pipeline wise to help with revenue, but um, your team doesn't have quite that same level of choice. I wrote an article about when you're keeping toxic clients, you're effectively saying to your team, this revenue is more important than your happiness. And that's not a good message. That was especially bad during the Great Resignation when people were jumping to new jobs. But it's still a problem now where jobs aren't as plentiful, for sure, and companies have perhaps the upper hand when it comes to negotiations, but that doesn't mean you should ignore it or take advantage of that. So, Kate, I know we've talked about sort of an escalated approach, kind of thing. It doesn't say jump automatically to doing a sabbatical, but there can be some other things. Kate, as a starting point, what have you noticed among our clients around burnout in general, whether it's employee related or beyond?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's susceptible to burnout, whether you're the owner or the employee. And hopefully, as agency owners, you are only hiring new rope employees.
Mhm.
But something that you might find is that new rope employees, they go above and beyond. They work really, really hard. They're there to support you and they're really positive. But sometimes operating at that level can cause them to get to burnout a lot faster. And so we're seeing that a lot of employees are struggling to keep up with the momentum that they've created for themselves. And as the owner, it's your responsibility to check in with your employees, make sure that they're doing okay. One of the things that, Karl, you do that I think every agency owner should implement is O3s, one-on-ones.
Mhm.
So one-on-ones with your direct reports and then skip level meetings for all of the direct reports for your direct report. So it skips a manager. And this kind of allows you to just check in, touch base, see how your employees are doing. Something that I like to do as a manager is check in on priorities. How are they feeling in terms of their workload? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Do I need to help them shift things around to get their schedule more aligned with that's something that's actually feasible?
Yeah.
And as an employee myself, I know that I'm a recovering perfectionist, as we like to say, and
Yeah.
I find it's very hard to take time for myself. So it's helpful for my manager to recognize when I need a break and help encourage me to take a break when I need one as well.
And for those listening, I am Kate's manager. So, yeah, and you don't really, you're not going to pick that up. You're not going to pick up potential concerns if you weren't talking to your team, or if the only conversation you have with your direct reports is like, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Go do this. What's the status on this? What's the status on that? Um, you know, some of that is creating space in your schedule to get to know your employees as people. That's been a problem for a long time. One of my grandfathers was a business professor at Cornell for 40 some years and also a management consultant under doing what we would now call organizational behavior. And I found one of his surveys, one of his studies from the 1950s that looked at relationships between employees and supervisors. And there's a theme that employees in the 1950s said they wish that their boss would treat them as a person rather than just as a worker. But think about how many companies struggle with that today, 70 some years later. It is a chronic problem. The good news, as I talk about in the new Calm the Chaos book, when you're the boss, you get to create the work environment you want, the work environment maybe you wish that you had had. If you'd like to get updates when the book goes live, you can go to calmthechaos.xyz. Calmthechaos.xyz. You can sign up and get updates for that. On the one-on-one meetings, I use the manager tools format, which is 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. So it's 30 minutes every week, 10 minutes about what the employee wants to discuss, 10 minutes about what you want to cover, and 10 minutes focused on the future around professional development, long-term initiatives. The first time I did an O3 with another team member a couple of years ago, one of the things that she mentioned was that, at that point was in her mid-30s. She said, I've never had a boss ask what I wanted to talk about before. That was quite something. Uh, But I was just following the worksheet. The worksheet is ask the employee, what do you want to talk about? So, I mean, there's a lot of power in that. Also, I will say, where there's things that I want to check in about, usually, Kate, in our meetings, you usually cover those anyway, right? Because we're aligned on priorities. To your point about priorities, and this is for everyone listening, if you're noticing that a team member is seeming overwhelmed, don't do what a former boss did. I was working later and the boss was heading home and I was still there working. And the boss was like, don't work too hard. That was not something I appreciated because I'm like, I'm working on this to help you. What would have been better would be if my boss had said, hey, it looks like you've got some other, additional stuff to work on. What are you planning to focus on tonight? Like what's on your list? The point being that there may have been some things that didn't have to happen right now. Some things could have waited until tomorrow, some things could have waited until next week, kind of thing. So rather than sort of a glib, don't work too hard, instead check in. And I mean, Kate, I know I've checked in with you about that. What is it like when I check in about your priorities?
I think it's really helpful. It's nice to know that you're concerned about my workload and making sure that what I have bandwidth for. And it's also helpful to something that I might think is urgent is
Hmm,
actually not as urgent as I think it is. And so we are able to defer it later, which then gives me more capacity to work on other items. And so it's always good to just be in communication with direct report and manager so that you're both on the same page. Because if you don't communicate, that's going to lead to problems.
for sure, for sure. And I when you hire conscientious people, they're going to probably want to do more than you're expecting as the manager. I mean, if you're hiring people who plan to do a lot less than you expect, that might be a wet twine problem, and that's its own thing. But, hiring high performers can have its own problems. So, we talked about recommending time off. One of the things we use is something that we've borrowed this from a larger company, critical time off, CTO. And critical time off is different from PTO, paid time off, or other things, in that it doesn't come out of the PTO bucket. It doesn't require pre-scheduling or targeting pre-scheduling. Basically, it's like you need urgent time off right now, go take it, rather than feeling you need to just keep working, keep pushing, and things like that. Do keep in mind for people listening, critical time off. I would recommend deferring to the employee who needs it around their timing. For instance, if you see someone stressed, don't just come in and say, all right, go home right now, stop working right now, blah, blah, blah. Because they may have things that if they don't get through what they're working on right now, they're going to be more stressed. So I frame it as more of a conversation. Kate, as the recipient of some of those conversations, what would be your tips for managers?
Yeah, I think so. One of the key things about that is having an interest in the more personal aspects of your employees' lives. And it's up to them on what they choose to share, of course. But if you know that they're struggling with something outside of work and that might cause them to not show up fully at work, something like critical time off might be just what they need. So, for instance, I recently just went through this where my daughter was really sick and she's 10 months. So, I'm a new parent. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sleep deprived and exhausted and stressed. And in the midst of all of that, trying to also function as a high performing employee. And so, Karl, you recognize that maybe you need to take the time to, take a day or two if you need to, but no pressure. And I fought it at first because I don't like to take time off, but every employee should. But so I was able to take the time that I needed to go to all the doctor's appointments and figure that out and not worry about my work. I'm also very lucky that I was able to delegate any of the remaining items that I had to other team members. So I felt fully supported in taking the time away. So that is another aspect. But as a manager, making sure that your employee can take the time, and then if they need to delegate tasks, help them with that, so
Yes.
that they don't feel stressed when they come back.
And I will say, my recognizing it wasn't solely me. Like I knew you're stressed, but thanks to Diane, who flagged, a bit more about what was going on, so that I could then make a decision and take action. So, I mean, I think that's important for any team. Ideally, people are looking out for each other and looking to help. So thanks to Diane on that as well. Think we talked about the one-on-one meetings, the O3, we talked about an escalated approach where, it's not immediately going to, take a sabbatical. Now, one of the things we have as an employee benefit is that you get a 4-week sabbatical every 5 years. So after you're with the company for 5 years, you get 4 weeks off. Obviously, we schedule it in advance. It's not suddenly, you know what? I'm going to take 4 weeks off tomorrow kind of thing. I mean, when I did my sabbatical last year, I mean, we were planning aspects of that like a year in advance and other things, kind of lead up and thanks, Kate, to you and to Diane for support on that. And of course, Diane had her sabbatical and Kate, you have yours coming up relatively soon. Um, you know, sometimes I have clients who are like, I have an employee who's getting burned out. Should I suggest they do a leave of absence or something like that? I would say a leave of absence is a bit different from a sabbatical. A leave of absence is more like we gotta, they've got to get away from the business. Sabbaticals are a bit more of a, yeah, you're getting away, but it's more planned, it's more intentional. In my case, I traveled. Sometimes people will use sabbaticals to work on, they're like building a tree house in their backyard, for their kids or something like that. Like it's a bit more intentional. The leave of absence has just got to get away. A leave of absence may not fix things depending on the source of the burnout. If you can't reduce that constant stress in the work, a leave of absence isn't going to help, but it does make sense to potentially discuss. And whether that's covered under FMLA in the US or other paid leave or well, FMLA technically is not paid, but or some other kind of leave structure. If you have short-term disability coverage, that may be an aspect, something that could apply as well. But it's a complicated topic, but I think that the key thing here is that as we wrap up the segment, is pay attention to how your team is doing and take action and look out for each other. Kate, anything else you'd add on that?
The only other thing I'd add is also make sure that you're looking out for yourself too and taking care of yourself because you can't lead a team unless you're taking care of yourself too.
Yes, well, and thanks, Kate, in part, your editing on Come to Chaos. That'll be chapter one. Put on your own oxygen mask first.
Yes,
All right, Kate, thank you very much.
of course.
Our final segment today will be about client communication. So Diane, welcome back. Um, we recently updated our document on difficult client conversations. There's a series of scripts about what to say when different things come up. At one point it was 27, and then it was 42, and now it's up to 50 different scripts. Um, so, what would be your advice, Diane, about how to think about difficult conversations?
I think, like with any, management situation, you have to look at the other person's situation. So what is the client dealing with on their side? How did you get to this difficult conversation? I mean, is it something that the agency caused, the client caused, or just completely unrelated? And you have to kind of plan ahead. I think a lot of the difficult conversations, arise about money. Like
Mm,
we talked earlier about client wants more for less. What you can't have a situation where one of our favorite subjects, you constantly have scope creep from a client, but you haven't dealt with why it's happening. You have to be able to have open and honest conversations and don't let things become like maybe one giant
mm,
conversation to solve a problem. So you were just talking about checking in and doing O3s
yeah.
and working with employees. The same kind of holds true for clients. Um, their life is much more remote. You don't necessarily have the same situations that and opportunities that you had years ago or even 5 years ago, where you could meet with a client and go out and have lunch or have dinner. Those opportunities seem to be shrinking in terms of frequency as well as
Yeah.
duration. So you have to find ways to initiate conversations with clients so that they understand what's going on, that you can set the right expectations. So, for example, set up regular meetings
Mm,
and touch bases so that as you're working through a project, look at, all right, we need to talk about this, because if you're getting their buy-in at various stages of the process, you're not necessarily going to run into the, oh my gosh, you know, we're off budget or we're this. You're having those conversations as you're going along. But if you do run into like the oh my gosh darn moment, you have to be logical and come up understanding what's the minimum outcome that you will be satisfied with, and then what is the client likely to want. So in most cases, it's nope, not paying more. I want it done yesterday. And you can't be defensive or negative on the situation, but sometimes if it's their changes and you didn't flag the change orders ahead of time, but just went along, it's like it's a surprise. You have
yeah.
to be cognizant of their budget. Like, okay, if we implement this change order, these are the consequences. We're happy to do the work, but we have to reset. So it's being proactive,
Hmm.
but also then planning if you have to have, that reset meeting where reset the client expectations for whatever reason and have the facts. Provide them with here's where we are today, show them the progress. demonstrate the value. The other thing that is something that I did with most clients that you'd think, well, of course, but isn't always done is, all right, what do they need to demonstrate their value to their boss? Make the client the hero. So if you can provide your client with, you know, the packaged up report or data or recap that they then can in turn make their own to deliver to their boss,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you have the more of a partnership relationship that you're helping them look good to their boss, that maybe the conversations are not quite as difficult. You're always going to run into, before you mentioned, the cheap client or the one who's just not interested in hearing anything you have to say. So you go back to what's the minimum outcome
Mhm.
that I want out of this? And sometimes it's, all right, we're going to have to write this off. If nothing else,
Mhm.
write it off for now, but know that you're never going to do this again and communicate that.
Yeah.
You have another phrase that I love, and it's strategically free.
Yeah.
That you can say, all right, we're making the decision that we're going to absorb the hit on this, but understand that everything was here, and I'm sorry that it was not clear, but this is a one-time thing. It's not going to be an every time thing. And have your documentation presented before you start the work. Make sure that everything is clear, because the more that you can be on the same page with the client, the
Yeah.
less frequent those difficult conversations will be. Another thing to do is rehearse the conversation with somebody.
Mm.
We've just seen a lot about debate prep, etc., or interview prep. Well, you know, do some prep. Don't walk into a difficult conversation with a client without a little rehearsal with either a peer or your supervisor, or pick somebody
Mhm.
so that they can help you with the, all right, what if they bring up this, or what if they bring up that, so that you're prepared to answer questions in a non-threatening way, or you really feel more confident in the,
I think
the
there's
way you're approaching things.
a lot of complaints about, oh, the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting, and there's even the ribbon, right? I survived another meeting that should have been an email. The thing is, if you're having a potentially tense client-facing meeting, you should meet internally to plan, okay, who's going to be there from our side, their side, what's likely to happen, what are our answers to likely concerns the client might have. And then the meeting after the meeting is to debrief on how it went. I mean, like after office hours today, we're going to debrief. We'll take a break and then we're going to debrief on how things went, so we can improve for the future. So, you need to find the right cadence for all of this. I like your point also about, certainly being proactive in different ways. Clients don't like surprises. Well, okay, maybe they like good surprises, but most agency surprises in agency life tend not to be good necessarily, but a tough spot. Um, maybe final question, Diane, as we're wrapping up this segment and wrapping up office hours today. From your sort of hard-won experience working with clients, if someone is, say, either newer to client service, or maybe they're looking to do better, maybe they've been doing it for a while, but they've been kind of doing their best, what's your number one tip for working with clients in an agency setting?
Really pretty simple. I think listen and learn.
Mm.
Um, I spent a lot of time, and maybe more than I should have, learning about the client's business, not anywhere near what they knew. But if you spend the time to, I mean, look at their website, understand what they're all about, and then you can ask your client meaningful questions that hopefully are, framed in a way that I want to know more about you. What are your values? What's important to you? What are you looking for out of this relationship versus as an agency walking in and saying, well, this is how we're going to do it. I
Right.
don't know that that ever really works.
No.
You can try it. And I mean, in some cases, yeah, it probably will work. I've gotten, a lot more out of a relationship when it is collaborative
Mm,
versus, one-sided or adversarial. Uh, it the more you demonstrate that you're willing to listen and learn, I think the more willing clients are to give you the time to do that and then pay it off by demonstrating that, okay, you shared this, therefore we included that here, and it's validating that, okay, yeah, we get it.
mm,
So it's, get your ducks in a row before you walk in. We don't walk in there and say, oh, you make this stuff? I had no idea.
yeah,
You need to do the homework before you have that encounter.
that makes sense. So certainly getting to know their industry, the table stakes, but getting to know them, I mean, that ties into warmth and competence. It's not just enough to do the job, but you need to show clients that you care. Well, Diane, thank you so much for joining. Appreciate it. And of course, thank you to Kate for joining and also serving as producer today. This concludes agency office hours for October 2024, although certainly most of what we discussed is evergreen advice that you could apply at your agency at any time in the future. I'm Karl Sakas. I hope you'll join us again at a future office hours. We're meeting here on Zoom every second Tuesday of the month. And if you're watching the video, please like and subscribe so you can get notified as things come out in the future. So thank you, everyone, and good luck out there.